Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
We continue our international series with Mountaineer Andrew Locke in our episode, Mastering Conflict and Challenge on a Side of a Mountain. Andrew Locke, being the only Australian to summit all 14 of the world's 8,000-meter peaks, has met with many challenges. Tragedy, exhaustions, sacrifices, and his own near-death experiences are all part of his mountaintop adventure. Teamwork and leadership take on a new meaning when faced with such physical and mental demands. Andrew will share with us his challenges, why he does what he does, and how he handles conflict while he travels the terrain. Andrew Locke is the most accomplished high-altitude mountaineer in Australian history. He is the only Australian, the first person in the entire British Commonwealth, and just the 18th man in the world to climb all 14 of the world's 8,000-meter mountains. His achievements encompass 18 summits of those 8,000-meter peaks, including Mt Everest, twice, 3 times that of any other Australian, placing him in a select group of the world's best alpinists. Additionally, Andrew accomplished the first Australian ascent of 6 of those mountains, a record that can never be broken. He holds a Bachelor of Science, Social Science, and Emergency Management with distinction. In addition to being a professional corporate speaker, he is a regular speaker at charity events and is the author of his recent book, Summit 8000, a memoir of his mountaineering achievements with stories of survival, climbing rivalries, and mountain politics. Included in his numerous achievements, he is the official ambassador for Scouts Australia, the Sir David Martin Foundation, and the Australian Himalayan Foundation. He has twice been awarded the Mt Everest Medal by the government of Nepal, and in fact, Andrew joins us from Nepal as we speak now. So thank you, Andrew, so much for joining us.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for having me on the program.
Yes, and we've been talking via email for a while now, and now the time has come that you're part of our international series, and we're honored to have you. And so, in starting off on the program, I'm very curious to know more about what's motivated your passion to scale the mountaintops of the world.
It was a bit of an evolution, Patty, because I came up through the Scouts and I had an introduction to the outdoors, quite a comprehensive introduction, and indeed a love for the outdoors. But the thing that all those adventures instilled in me was a passion for outdoor challenges where the outcomes were not completely guaranteed. And I love that need to be self-reliant and resilient and to break down the challenges into achievable chunks so that I could resolve each mission I went on. And in my early 20s, I was introduced to mountaineering and became very, very passionate about it. And I set my sights on climbing Mount Everest. But by the time I climbed Mount Everest, I'd actually climbed the 7 of those 8,000-meter peaks. And at that time, no Australian had climbed all 14 of the 8,000-meter peaks. And so for me, that seemed like a fabulous challenge because I really didn't think, as an Australian coming from the flattest and hottest country on earth, that it really was within reasonable grasp. But that's what made it such a worthwhile challenge. And so I took on the project, and it took me another 9 years to finish it.
And 9 years to finish, meaning climbing the 14 of the peaks, is that right?
Well, in fact, no. It took me 16 years to climb all 14 of them, and it was 9 years just to climb the last 7. From the day I had the dream to climb Mount Everest, it actually took me 15 years to finally reach the summit of Everest, and then another 9 years to climb the other 8,000 metre peaks. So it was a very long-term project. But I do think that it's the very lucky people in life who discover a passion and an aptitude for it. And whatever the field of employ or pursuit that we engage in, if we are passionate about something that we're good at, then that opens doors and we can achieve great things.
Well, I tell you, you've picked a passion that is very, very challenging, and this is what I'm hoping that we're going to definitely discuss today, because one of our missions is to educate and raise self-awareness about how we manage these, for us, everyday challenges, and in particular conflict, and that's what we do. I educate the world about peace and conflict and how do we not be afraid of those challenges. And so for you face these types of challenges, but even at a survival level, the kind of politics and conflict that you face on the side of a mountain probably on a very regular basis. So tell me a little bit, what are some of these challenges that you face yourself?
Well, probably the most obvious of the challenges is just the objective dangers on those mountains. And when I say objective dangers, I'm talking about crevasses into which you can fall and avalanches which come down the mountain without too much warning, large cliffs that come, and of course the cold and then the extreme altitude of these big peaks. But those are mostly challenges that can be managed. Probably the less obvious ones are the self-doubt that creeps into every team member's mind during the expeditions, because the objectives are so big and the risks are so high. And in teams, of course, there can be a lack of unified purpose, and for a team leader to keep the team on the same path. And overcoming the challenge that inevitably, or the conflict that inevitably occurs, is one of the major challenges as well. And then, of course, as everyone would be aware, these mountains are becoming more and more popular, and so there are more and more teams, and therefore there's potential conflict, not just within the team, but between teams to overcome very difficult conditions in tight time frames where you don't really want to be tripping over other climbers.
So what would be an example of, when you're in this treacherous type of situation and everyone's survival is based on the work of the team, and you just brought up between teams, what would be an example of a typical conflict between teams or even within the teams that you might encounter when you're climbing?
Well, because the evolution of climbing has seen groups move from private climbers working together, highly experienced, and they've learned how to climb. It's moved now to the commercial environment where groups of individuals are coming together to be guided up a mountain by one or two experienced guys and maybe some support Sherpas in the Himalaya. But the challenge there is that each of these individuals has a personal expectation rather than a team focus. And so the great challenge there is that if an individual on the team thinks that they are in some way being disadvantaged or not being given every opportunity to reach the summit, this is the problem for the leader to manage. And I've on numerous expeditions, I've found that I've had to make it very clear to every member of the expedition that we are climbing as a group, and that the focus of the expedition is about team success and team safety rather than individuals. We'll get into how I achieve that, but that's probably the greatest focus or greatest challenge for the leader within the team, keep that harmony and team spirit at the forefront. Between teams, what you find is that because there is limited space on the mountain and a very finite window of opportunity to climb to the summits between the very bad weather systems, that you do find expeditions competing for places on the mountain to put their camps and days on the mountain in which to strive for the summit. So I can give you an example. On Mt Everest in 2000, I was leading a team to the summit of Everest, and there were 3 other teams going for the summit on that day. And so I met with the leaders of the other teams, and we each agreed to depart at slightly different times from the highest camp to climb through the night to the summit, and that we would, rather than one team taking all the responsibility for opening that route and putting down the rope and making safe the passage to the top, that we would leapfrog each other and take turns to embrace some of that risk and do the hard work of putting the rope in place, so that the responsibility was shared, but also the timing was staggered. That we over each other, and we could collectively realize our dreams without bashing heads along the way.
And did that indeed work?
Well, in fact, it did to within 100 meters of the summit, at which point 3 of those teams had leapfrogged each other and put their rope in place, and at which point the 4th team was invited to come forward and lead the last little bit to the summit and put down its safety ropes as we climbed. And in fact, at that point, that team declared that they had not brought their share of the rope to safeguard the climb, because they'd hoped that the rope that the other teams were carrying would be sufficient. And that was an extraordinary experience, because it actually cost the summit of all 4 teams, because no one team could then go ahead to the summit because we'd all used our rope. And that was an extraordinary experience for me to see how one team could let down not only itself, but the other 3 teams as well. And in fact, on that day, no team reached the summit. We did come back a few days later with more rope in my team and complete the climb. But that was a lesson to me that whilst I thought I'd managed the potential issues quite well, I was let down by placing my absolute faith in the integrity of the other leaders' decision-making.
That's always challenging when your own integrity and tension, as your own, you being the leader of your own team, having to rely and depend on these other leaders to have the same intention and integrity as well. And don't we, everyone experiences that. If you ever worked in a job, we always are relying on the other teams to be able to meet our mission or our goal. And when we're not aligned, because we're very competitive, we see each other in a competitive, meaning conflict type of way. It's really a shame, because then, like you said, the cost was high on that particular day, in that no one got to reach the summit on that particular day. What do you find that because this has been an evolution for you over time, and you're leading these teams, what must you and the team to address these challenges in non-destructive ways? So when you find that other people, either they're taking very focused individual, they're so focused on their own individual goal versus the success of the team, how do you manage those kind of destructive, very competitive things? What have you learned to do about that?
Well, I have found that it's of absolutely paramount importance to outline expectations from the very beginning. And if I'd had that discussion with those other teams that night in base camp rather than at 8,000 meters, just as we're about to set out for the summit, we may have avoided that issue with the other teams. But within the team, I have always found it really, really worthwhile to clarify our plans, our objectives, the anticipated obstacles, as well as solutions to overcome them, so that from the very outset, everyone has a clear understanding of what is expected, not just of them, but throughout the challenge of climbing the particular mountains. And if they have this understanding, then there's less fear and lack of self-confidence, which would otherwise lead to potentially lead to conflict. And I've always been very careful to realize that the sum is greater than the collection of the parts, and that before we ever set out on a mountain, I'd like to get the team together to train for just a couple of days, train at the base of the mountain and work together to engender in each member of the team an understanding of the fact that as leader, I can't support and assist each member individually all of the time, but that they can support each other when I'm not able to do it. And by doing that, it creates a shared ownership of both the project, but also of the obstacles. And so when we're climbing a slightly difficult part of the mountain, they know how to support each other, and it engenders ownership of the project itself. And it also encourages ownership of any problems and encourages communication, both in regard to identifying those issues, but also to providing solutions. Because we're working together and they are becoming team members focused on team success, because they start to realize they can't get there by themselves and I can't carry them all on my shoulders. But it becomes very much a team, an open communication environment, and a stronger team for having just done a bit of preparation prior to commencing the actual climb.
Now, what's interesting is I would assume that every time you lead a team, the team is not always the same team members each time, or are they?
No, they aren't. That's exactly right. And so I adopt that approach on each individual expedition. Because, as I say, these days in the world of commercial climbing, what you find is you have a number of potential individuals who potentially have never met each other coming from anywhere across the world to be facilitated up the particular mountain they've come to climb. And if they are allowed to just be individuals and not collaborate in a team focus, then the chances of success are far, far less. But if they work together and are supportive of each other and of working together with the staff members who are supporting them and guiding them, then the chances of success are so much higher. Particularly because taking ownership of the problem encourages them to communicate when they taking ownership of the project, I should say, encourages them to talk about problems when they identify them rather than glossing over them. Because the team success means individual success, but individual success does not mean team success.
Absolutely. And, so not only are you dealing with people from all over the world with different backgrounds, different cultural beliefs, different religious beliefs, different everything, and then to merge together as a team over 2 days at base camp before they start climbing can be a feat sometimes. And have you found yourself that there might be one or two individuals over the course of your lifetime who you're not going up because they don't seem like they've taken that ownership to be part of the team's success? Have you ever encountered that?
Look, I have. And, of course, in a commercial environment, I still try my best to assist them to succeed. But I have, on a number of occasions, found that I've been unable to assist those people to adopt a team perspective. And in fact, that they simply, some of these individuals may not even have the capacity to, finish the enterprise, the project, and I have on occasion had to remove them from the team because if they remain or have remained in the team without working collaboratively, they can be very, very destructive to the morale of the larger group. And my focus, firstly, is safety and then success, but my focus is on the team success, not those individuals. And so when it comes to a situation which I've not been able to resolve through dialogue with the individuals, then I've on occasion had to remove the individual.
Okay, and and that's not like unlike any other team that someone might be participating in. It's very interesting to hear, Andrew, you share your experiences, especially at the extreme. But the same team dynamics and leadership that is required, even on the type of mountaineering that you do with teams from all over the world. Now, one of the things you mentioned a couple times now is about how self-doubt, one, it's really important that people overcome their self-doubt, and also if they lack that self-confidence, and so the risks are really high. And so when that fear, a lot of times that self-doubt comes with fear, and so and that fear can certainly get in the way of building that accountability, that ownership, engaging in the conflict if there's a problem or challenge on the side of the mountain, and not engaging in destructive conflict. So what are some of the fears that you have faced yourself in leading your team, and what have you learned in how to overcome these fears and help others overcome the fears when they're in the midst of climbing?
Well, I guess with experience, I've learn to understand the issues that I inevitably face on the mountains, and so as a leader of a team, clearly my greatest fear is that there could be an injury to someone on the team. Success is a lesser concern, but overall my fear is that the expedition won't succeed or may not succeed, and of course amongst the group, their fear is normally for their safety. As the expedition progresses and they find themselves exposed to the harshness of climbing at high altitude, most clients on these commercial expeditions find themselves fearing for their very lives. And that, of course, can lead to conflict along the way. And so for me, I've always found it very, very useful to outline from the very beginning what the anticipated dangers are and how we're going to overcome them. And if we're very clear in identifying the dangers and how they will be resolved, be it an avalanche potential or exposure from falling down steep cliffs, by having a plan in place, a plan that is very clear and outlines the manner in which we will address any anticipated problems and what we can do if there are unanticipated problems, that puts the minds of most team members at rest. And if they are happy and willing to continue climbing, then that puts my fears at rest also. But of course, there will inevitably be, in those very tense situations, there will inevitably be some conflict. And I have always found there that when there is conflict and some negotiation needs to be conducted, then it's a matter of being very clear and very calm about the expectations of my expectations of the outcomes of the conflict negotiation. And what I try very hard to do is to make it less about the issue and more about the outcome. And so in terms of an expedition, the outcome is to achieve those expedition goals, to safely succeed and return from the mountain. And so when I discuss any issue, my focus is on resolving the issue to achieve the goals, and I can keep the focus of the conversation on those end goals, remind the people in the conversation of high-level objectives of the expedition, which is the summit and safe return. Then the conflict becomes less about the individual and more about the team's success and how we can achieve that. And that tends to take focus away from individual complaints and put them more on how to achieve our group goals and how to contribute to collaboratively achieving those goals.
I like the fact that, there's a number of things that you are obviously putting in place. And like you said early on, what was paramount is being super clear about those expectations, knowing exactly what the plan and how it will be resolved if there's some anticipated or unanticipated danger, so that it lessens that fear. And then if it starts to come up for them in any given moment, then you're able to really focus them. And a big part of it is keeping calm, as you said, keeping calm for them. I love the fact that you keep them refocused on that end goal, and hopefully that resolves and you were also really resolved about the language of resolving whatever the problem is, and that it's not that you're sitting there for 3 hours trying to negotiate. You're really trying to focus very quickly on the safety and the mission of the group. So very, very clear there. Let me just let listeners know that you are tuned in to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program, and I'm talking with Andrew Locke, Australia's famous and most accomplished mountaineer, about the challenges that he faces as a leader when he leads teams, and also how he manages and handles the conflict that might come up within the team. So, Andrew, anything else you want to say where we left off with overcoming these fears before we move on?
Yeah, well, look, the last thing I would say, Patty, is that in discussing conflict and issues, in trying to keep the team on focus, one of the things I always try and encourage is not just their contribution to the solution, but also reminding the team of the successes they've had so far. Because people tend to focus on what's in front of them and what is concerning them, and forget about the very good successes that they've achieved to date. And if they can reflect upon some of those great successes, in terms of a mountain, it might be that, we've climbed halfway up the mountain. Well, that's half the challenge already achieved. And if they then reflect upon the fact that they came to a mountain they never climbed before and have already climbed halfway up, then it lessens the intensity and the concern about the second half of the mountain, and whatever challenge, whatever is causing the problem in their mind at that time, being an issue for them, seems less by comparison to what they've already achieved, and so you can lessen the issue in that way.
I love that, being able to help them focus. Yes, because when we start to either panic or feel threatened or get into fear or any type of conflict, we do focus on what our immediate need is, tendency as the individual. So I love the fact that you remind them of those successes that they've already accomplished in that over the course of those hours as they're climbing. One thing that I was reading in a lot of your materials and website, and was watching your YouTube, and I loved listening to your experiences from your book as well, the Summit 8000 book, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what struck me was interesting is that some of the conflict also comes from what was said as mountaineering politics. Now, is the politics related to what you said earlier about these private and commercial groups, or is there other types of politics that get in the way that causes a lot of conflict when you're doing this work?
No, it is generally the conflict between private climbers and the evolution of commercial climbing on these mountains. I mean, there can be, I suppose, issues between highly competitive climbers, and where I guess the motivations are slightly different. And by example, I climb purely for the love of it. I just love being on the mountains, and I love challenging myself. But I come from a country where mountaineering is barely recognised, so I didn't have any commercial incentives or sponsorship obligations that really forced me to become competitive in my climbing. If I felt I ought to turn around on a bad day, then I would turn around. But of course, there are some climbers who are highly linked to large financial remuneration and support, and sometimes that can drive them to want to continue on a climb where I may no longer consider it safe to do so. And So that itself can cause conflict, and I have those are the sorts of sort of internal politics you might find in a small team, but in the larger climbing world now, and the climbing season on Everest is just about to begin. The main political conflict that you find is between the small private groups who want to do their climbs independently and the many large commercial groups that are being guided up the mountain who tend to, I guess, overwhelm smaller teams and take up the majority of the space on the mountain. And so there needs to be good negotiation between those private teams and the big commercial groups. And from my observation in the last couple of years, that has not been done very satisfactorily, and there has been a lot of conflict on Everest in particular.
I imagine that you, in my world, which is the dispute resolution world, at which I've been working for 20 years, I would say you've become quite the conflict management expert. Not only the mountaineering expert, but quite the conflict management expert, because, to be able to protect the safety of everyone's lives and leading the team, I mean, you have to have incredible leadership skills and communication skills and team building skills and certainly conflict management competency in really leading a successful climb and expedition. And I guess, is there one expedition that really stands out I mean, you already shared an example of a memorable example where the cost was really high and no one got to the summit. Was there one that was just highly successful because everything lined up, everyone managed the conflict, the fear, they communicated well? Is there any one that particular that really stands out for you?
Yes, there was, and it was on the most dangerous mountain that I've ever climbed, and it's called Mount Annapurna. It's also in the Himalaya. It's one of the 8,000-metre mountains, but it has a terribly high statistical rate for deaths on the mountain because it's just so dangerous. But I teamed up for that expedition in 2007 with climbers from around the world, and ironically, there was another expedition on the mountain that year, and it's very rare because the mountain is just so dangerous. Nobody really wants to climb it. But we collaborated on the mountain, and it actually a situation developed where two members of my team and two members of the other team unified to become the lead team on the mountain to open the route and to assess the risks and to put in place the safety ropes and the camps, while the remaining members of both teams then collaborated to support the first team by bringing up more rope and more food and fuel and tents, etc., etc. And it was a very, very effective way of proceeding up the mountain. But it was a very dangerous mountain, and at one point, the support group made up of the remaining members of those two teams decided that they did not want to continue with the climb because it was so dangerous. And yet, the lead group, of which I was a member, we had been doing the risk assessment and all the mitigation of those same risks high on the mountain, and in doing so had taken on more of the ownership of the challenge. We'd really engaged intimately with this challenge, and we actually thought it was safe enough to continue, which was really interesting because the ones who'd been following just a day or two behind hadn't really fully engaged with the challenge, and they felt it was a bit dangerous and a bit too dangerous and went down. We thought it was okay to keep going, but it did mean then that we no longer had the support that we had up to that point. So then we had to go through this change management, if you like, to enable us to continue without that support, with no more rope, no more tents, no more food. And that meant sacrificing a lot of, I guess, our comforts. We left our sleeping bags behind. We left most of our food behind, but we took what we needed to climb as safely as we could. And for the rest of the climb, it was uncomfortable. In fact, it was miserable. But we were able to continue to climb in as safe a way as possible by still remaining committed to the objective. And in fact, one member became sick and couldn't go on, so 3 of us continued, and we even changed the style of the climbing. The lightest climber went ahead and climbed above us. I was actually the biggest guy in the group, so I carried most of the equipment, so that the light guy could go quickly ahead of us. And then the 3rd member climbed behind us and brought up the rope that we had just climbed on, so we could use it again, and we became a very efficient team in climbing like a little pod, and a self-sufficient pod as we moved up the mountain, and our roles changed and we climbed in a different style, but we were ultimately successful because we very quickly negotiated roles and responsibilities. We understood how we agreed how we would approach the remainder of the climb, and we eventually succeeded. And as I write in my book, that was the most satisfying of all my climbs, because it was a very difficult climb, it was a very dangerous climb, but the team, that small core group of us, collaborated so well, and we actually were from 2 different expeditions, but we collaborated so well we overcome all the dangers and the objective challenges to finally reach the summit.
That's an amazing story. And how was that done? And how many days was that done, or how many hours was that done?
Well, this expedition took about 2 months, so that was over a number of weeks on the mountain.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh my goodness. That's amazing that y'all went through that. I've never climbed a mountain, so thank you for clarifying the timeline on that. That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, talk about adversity and talk about all the challenges, extreme challenges that you have to deal with, and yet that was the most successful because all parties believed in the same objective, took ownership, accountability, was there for each other, communicated, like you said, negotiated all the challenges that were there, even as you started to lose your support along the way. That's an amazing story, and I can't wait to hear more about that, because you have your book, and again, we'll talk about that because you have a version of it coming out in North America. As we start to wrap down, I have a couple more questions for you right quick, and that is, do you have any top tips, maybe 3 strategies or tips, and you've already actually kind of given, but if there's anything you want to highlight for listeners in dealing with adversity and conflict, especially in terms of the challenges that you deal with at that extreme, and that could actually be one of the call to actions, because our listeners are very well aware of our assignment for the week or call to action. Anything coming to mind for you right now?
Sure. I think with any really significant challenge, break it down into smaller challenges. For me, it was never about all 14 mountains right now. It was one mountain at a time, because each of those mountains was such a significant challenge on the way. But by achieving that, the ultimate challenge became smaller and smaller. And even on the mountain, I break that particular expedition into smaller challenges. I'll just focus on getting to Camp 1, and then I'll focus on getting to Camp 2. And then as you go along, you tick those boxes. And the second point then just becomes you remind yourself of successes that you've already achieved, and you draw strength from those accomplishments to remain focused on the final challenge, which then leads into, I guess, my third top tip, which is always keep your eye on the end game. And when your motivation starts to wane and perhaps there is some conflict, if you remind yourself of why you're passionate enough about the goal in the first place to begin it, then it's very easy to come back and remain focused. And by breaking those challenges into small steps and keeping your eye on what you were so passionate about at the very beginning, then as motivation wanes, you can bring yourself back online.
I love that very much. Thank you. That's wonderful. I love that, especially the one mountain at a time. Yes, break those into smaller challenges. And we do. Sometimes we get so immersed in our conflict situations that we're drowning in that. And to be able to, like you said, see that end game, and to be able to focus on those smaller successes, or even the number of smaller successes, to remind yourself or to remind others of that. I love that. Now, you are very passionate not just about mountaineering. You do a lot of athletic things for charities. And one of the charities that you're an ambassador of is the Sir David Martin Foundation, and it's a nonprofit in Australia which helps young people in crisis. And what do you want listeners to know about this organization and your passion for supporting them?
Well, in a modern country like Australia, it is simply unacceptable to have young people living on the streets. And the Sir David Martin Foundation works to save and rebuild the lives of these young people, which have gone off track for whatever reason, sometimes through no fault of their own at all. But to get their lives on track, to get off drugs and off the streets and get their lives rebuilt, this is a bigger challenge than anything I've ever done, and it's much more intimidating to them. But they are trying, and the least we can do is support them. And the foundation currently puts about 120 young people through their program each year, and that costs millions of dollars. But we get thousands of applications, which is just, it shows the desire of these kids to get their lives back on track, and we simply can't afford to put all those thousands of kids through the program, which is a great tragedy because we have an 80% success rate. And so I remind myself whenever I'm on a mountain and feeling tired and losing my motivation and thinking that I'd like to give up, I remind myself of the challenges these kids face and how focused and resilient they are, and what a worthwhile cause it is, and that then helps me to refocus and get on with my challenge. And I absolutely, I'm honoured, absolutely honoured to be a part of that organisation, to be able to support it because it is just so valuable.
Now, when you say that there are thousands of applications, is it a school that they're going through? What is the program exactly? They're taking them off the streets, providing counseling, drug and alcohol counseling. Is that what they're doing?
All of that. Yeah, it's a 3-month program, and the program takes around 30 kids per semester, and they are taken, as you say, they're taken off drugs and off the alcohol, and they're given proper food, and they're given psychological and psychiatric counselling. They're also taught the basics of life, how to manage their finances, and given a small, a basic trade, a skill, like being a barista. So they can, when they leave, they can actually earn money rather than having to steal it. They can manage that money. They're taught how to cook, so they can buy proper food and have the self-respect to by earning money. They can buy their food. They can rent an apartment. They can be off the street, and they can start to get their lives back on track. And clearly, it's a very intense program. It takes 3 months. But at the end of it, as I say, we have a 80% success rate or a 20% recidivism rate. So that's extraordinary.
Well, that's wonderful. And I know you, again, have been involved in many charities, and I was looking at your Facebook earlier today to see some of the things you were involved. You're not just a mountaineer, but you're a cyclist and a yachtsman doing the racing with the yachts. And so you are very involved in helping raise funds and bring awareness, and that's awesome that you've been able to do that for them and many other of the charities that you work with. And in fact, I looked at their website, so folks, if you're interested in learning more, for those listeners in Australia who already probably know about this organization, it's www.s like in Sir, D like in David, M as in Martin, and F in foundation.org.au in Australia there. And you can find Andrew and all of his information. We're going to talk about his book just briefly here, but his website is Andrew, ANDREW-LOCK, LOCK.com. Now, you do have the Summit 8000 book that came out last year, but say more, because you have a new, a new version coming out in North America. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
Oh, thanks, Patty. Yeah, it is the same book, but it's being published in North America. I think it comes out in July of this year. And the book is the same book, but the title is different, and it will be called Master of Thin Air. And it's been hardcover. I'm really looking forward to seeing that, actually. And there are so many climbers and adventurers in North America that I hope they'll find of interest.
Now, will you be doing a book tour here in North America when that becomes launched?
I don't know yet. I really hope so, and I'm working on that with the publishers. Of course, I live in Australia, so there's a bit of expense in coming across. But if we can make it work, then yes, I'll come to North America and do a bit of a book tour, and might be able to get in a bit of a climbing tour while I'm there.
Well, there you go. That would be awesome to do that. Now, are there any other things that you would like listeners to know? Are you doing any special presentations, whether it's on Australia or any that you want people to know about to come see you at one of the keynotes that you might be doing, or any workshop?
Oh, look, I would say keep an eye on my website and my Facebook site. I post fairly regularly up there if I'm doing any public lecturing. And, of course, I'm a full-time corporate speaker these days, so if people would like to contact me, they can do so through my website. And I guess that's all I'd say in relation to the website. I guess the final thing I'd say to your listeners, though, Patty, would be that, challenge is not something to be afraid of. I think that no goal is impossible, no matter how intimidating it may seem. But, of course, things don't always go to plan, and that's where clarity of vision and a commitment to work with your partners and team members to resolve conflict and to stay true to the goal is so important. I think clear and constructive communication is absolutely the key to achieving goals and resolving conflict.
Absolutely. What a wonderful final message. And Andrew, thank you so much for being with us for our international series. I feel incredibly honored and humbled to have been a part of this conversation with you.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.